Thank you, Jake. So, I'm going to have to hold this one, so we'll see if this works, but in a nutshell, does that work? Yes, that works. Okay, so I'm Thomas Farrugia, CEO at BetaBugs Limited, and with Simon, we'll be walking you through how you can farm insects. And as Jake has said, you can do that from today. It's not something where you need to fumble around and learn how to do it anymore. Equipment is available, supply of genetics and eggs is available, and we'll be going through that. So, at BetaBugs, we're an insect genetics company. We develop and distribute breeds of black soldier fly to the insect farming industry. In effect, you can think of us as a mini genus or a mini aviagen supplying the genetics. Based up in Edinburgh, in Scotland, collaborating with the Roslin Institute, the guys who made the Dolly the sheep, and effectively working on that breeding program so we can bring high-performance genetics to the sector. And what we improve is the black soldier fly larva. So that is effectively an inch-long protein bar. And what you then have is, as it grows, it becomes a fly, which lays eggs. And this is what the life cycle looks like. You've got fly lays eggs. The eggs start as baby larvae, so they start as really small pinheads, grow into big larvae, and then they become pre-pupa and then pupa. So that's when they start getting ready to become a fly, a bit like when a caterpillar goes into chrysalis and then becomes a butterfly. You can actually split the life cycle, and this is what we help to do at BetaBugs. You can actually not worry about growing the fly at all and making eggs. You can just buy that in and just focus on producing the larvae. So you basically cut off the rest of the life cycle, simplifying it in a bit in the same way as you do with the broiler industry, for example. You don't go and produce your own broiler chicks, you just bring them in. And a bit about the black soldier fly. It's hungry, fast growing, so that inch-long insect starts off as really small, and analogously, it's a bit like taking a rabbit and in the space of 2 weeks, it becomes the size of an elephant. That's how fast these things grow. And they can eat a wide range of things from, for example, vegetal matter to animal manure to meat and other byproducts from the agri-food industry. And they produce a high protein source. So they can be anything in the range, I'd say, from 40% up to 80% in terms of how you process the meal and how much oil you squeeze out of it. And it's also a low carbon alternative because you don't need to worry about importing the protein in and the kind of the environmental footprint you've got associated with soy. As you can see here, this is what happens when you do need to produce a lot of soy. You end up chopping a lot of forest down. That's land use change, and there's CO2 footprint associated with that. And you also need to ship it all in. And the key point here is this is a conservative estimate, but we could be replacing 500,000 tons of soy protein by 2050 by scaling up the insect protein industry in the UK. And I'll iterate, that's a conservative estimate by WWF, Tesco's. It can go beyond that. And that'll be around a sixth, I believe, of the UK's soy protein requirements. Similarly, in terms of CO2 savings, the other angle to this is you're growing it on food waste or things which are going effectively to landfill at sometimes. And that can be used to produce a protein source again, and you're basically saving CO2 from being generated at landfill. And the other point is you're also producing all your protein locally. And that means your supply chain is more resilient. It's a stronger supply chain, effectively. So when it comes to farming the insect, so the black soldier fly, you're able to turn waste into value, produce this low carbon protein source. You can use it on farm to feed. There's a bit of a challenge at the moment in terms of you can only feed it live to poultry. You can't feed it to pigs right now. And that's primarily in the UK. In the EU, they've already approved this, and we're just behind in terms of getting the legislation through. It was actually really interesting seeing the Tesco CEO say we need to move at getting this enabled. That's literally just 2 days ago. So there is definitely going to be a drive for enabling insect protein in our supply chain in the UK. You can also feed it to fish right now, and it can be used in pet feed as well. Lastly, you can improve plant health because the frass, which is a byproduct from the farming, a bit like an animal manure effectively, works really well when you spread it on field. So it's high in nitrogen and phosphorus, and it's got some other parts in there which help improve plant health. So this is how it all fits in. So you effectively have an opportunity to grow the bugs on materials in the agri-food supply chain, and then that you can take those bugs, process them, and produce an insect meal which can be used in the animal and aquafeed industries or the pet feed industries. And then that just works its way down to the consumer through the rest of the agri-food supply chain. Anything coming out of retail in terms of excess food waste can then be pushed back into the supply chain. You just do it all over again. Now, we'll start digging a bit more into the technical aspects, but really high level. But the idea here is to grow bugs, you need hardware and genetics. The bugs come from us, the genetics, the bugs and genetics come from us, and Simon will touch on the hardware, and use that to make your ingredients. So effectively, this is a farming operation, like any other farming operation. Main factors to control, again, you need to be able to control your environment and have really good environmental control in the system, and also controlling the husbandry. So you need to really have a good control of the rearing parameters and also make sure you have a consistent feed going in. Because they are like any other animal, feed in, feed out, or feed in, output out. So if you put in a poor feed, you're not going to get a lot of growth, you might not get as high a protein content, and you might not get lots of output either. So it's really about getting those conditions right. And it really helps with having consistent production. So the feed itself is usually quite wet. It's nearly a slurry at times, and you actually see the stuff used in pig farming, liquid feeding can actually be applied to this industry now. There's usually a lot of feed. When you want to produce thousands of tons of insect protein a year, you're going to need thousands, if not tens of thousands, of insect feed per year as well to grow them on. It can be nutritionally varied depending on where you're sourcing it from, but you really want to try and have it as consistent as possible so the larvae just grow happily and you have a consistent output coming out, both in terms of quantity and quality. And lastly, it tends to be perishable. We're talking, let's say you're using fruit and veg, it will go off after a while. So there are methods like the same way, we ensile food or hay and barley or you store it. That's the kind of approaches we have to take with storing feed as well here to make sure you can actually stockpile a bit of it as well. And then what do the eggs and the baby larvae need? So this is when you receive genetics and you want to grow it out. You need to give them, again, a constant environment. They need to be growing in a warm environment, so they've got the right conditions to grow, usually 27 degrees Celsius with a high humidity as well, so they don't dry out. And then you need usually good nutrition for a good start. So sometimes you actually see in production operations having a special feed for the baby larvae, higher energy density, and just a bit more around formulation so you can make sure they're getting a good start. Now, very importantly, you need to have them at the right density. So again, stocking density, same thing as with other animals. If you have too many of them, they'll crowd up and they won't have enough feed. They will turn out to be quite small. If you have too little of them, you actually don't have enough to eat all the feed, and then the feed just goes off. So it's a bit about making sure you have the right amount. And then when it comes to farming larvae, so why farm larvae only? It's like a broiler operation. It's simpler, more efficient when you have the larvae angle only. It's more stable because you don't need to worry about bringing the eggs in and making your own eggs. And when you think about a fly, it's a very different animal to a larva. It's basically a second animal. And that requires its own set of cages. It requires specific temperature, humidity, and it's only hanging around usually for 2 weeks, and then it's done. And it only lays eggs once, so you're constantly having to make these flies. So this is a way simpler operation where you basically cut the fly bit out and you just bring the genetics in all the time. That means you can solely focus on production. So what we offer 2 products. So we offer Just Fly, which is a straight, I'd say, easy entry product. It's not as push through the breeding program, really. It's to get you up and running. It's about learning the husbandry, learning the process. And then Hyperfly is the high performance genetics, which is improved for things like growth rate, size of larvae, survivability from eggs. And what that translates into is you get more from those eggs in terms of output. And that's, once you've established the process, you can then move into Hyperfly. When it comes to working with us, we supply, so we've got our own breeding program where we develop Hyperfly and we supply that. And we also have an egg production operation, so basically a big hatchery for making black soldier fly eggs. And we supply our specialized genetics locally and further afield. And so by working with us, you effectively have a partner who's also an expert. If you're doing that, you're also simplifying your operation, as we've touched on previously. And I think the key point, though, is that because we don't produce the protein. So if you think about that, we're all about enabling companies to establish their own operations, and we're invested in their success. And that's why we also run the breeding program, effectively improving the genetics so that producers can do more. And there's a different set of ways you can get up and running. So we do have effectively a small starter pack, but then as you scale, you go regularly, you can go to larger batches of eggs. It's in grams there, but I'll make the point that a single gram of eggs will turn into 4 kilos of larvae on the Just Fly product, and even more with Hyperfly. So the idea here is small grammages turn into kilos. If you go into kilos of eggs, it becomes tons of larvae. And that's where we eventually see producers moving to. And that's what's already happening in the UK with companies. We're supplying companies which are buying in batches of eggs to grow them out and then make the protein source so they can effectively improve their performance. No, effectively supply the supply chain with an alternative protein. We're at stand 37. It's kind of the joining bit. It's towards the new kip area. It's in hall 1. And we're happy to take any questions, or both here, but also to discuss further with yourselves as to how we can get you up and running with insect farming. And again, I'll iterate, this is something which is happening now, and it's only going to increase in scale over the next few years. And it's a great opportunity for diversification. Thank you.